Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this insightful panel today, brought to you by Hacking HR. Today we'll be talking about a really important topic in modern business, and that is digital transformation in HR, a strategic and tactical roadmap. My name's Rod Hutchings, and I'm the moderator for today, and I'm from Melbourne, Australia. And it's really going to give me a lot of pleasure to have this conversation over the next hour. We've got some amazing panelists for you, and let's bring them forward, please. So, good morning.
Hey, Rod.
Good morning, Rod.
Some I've seen before.
Good morning.
Kerry?
It's Rod and the ladies.
Yes, and some new panelists as well. So we might just start nice and easy, and if you can introduce yourself, we'll start with Lisa. And what really interests you in this topic would be a nice little intro. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Lisa Sanders. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I think the reason that this spoke to me is that, I've been doing HR and people and operations for 20 years or more. And I'm tired of HR living in Excel spreadsheets. And we should not be there anymore. And so I want to make sure that stops. So, and I think that we, sit at the center of any type of organizational transformation because it's so much centered around people, not so much the tech and communication.
Thanks, Lisa. And good morning, Kerry.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or wherever anybody is. So totally agree with Lisa. I often say that every transformation is a people transformation. So whatever technology or things you want to change, they don't come to life until people do their jobs differently. And my litmus test for any transformation is how do people's jobs change? Because if it's just technology and you can't tell, then you don't need to tell anybody about it. Just that can happen magically in the background. My entry point into this, I've been in digital transformation on the people side of things for 30 years. Wow, I feel old when I say that, but a long time. I worked for SAP, which is a major source of transformation for organizations, for 18 years. And I was a customer of theirs for 12 before, and I still live in the transformation space. So my bias certainly comes from the people lens, having led organizational change management for Coca-Cola globally and things like that. So that is my view in terms of how to come into all this. And HR certainly is either regardless of the transformation scope, a big part of it goes back to how people's jobs change and how to support them in executing their work. And B, to Lisa's point, hopefully HR is playing too in terms of getting great technology and digital capabilities to help lead this space better because it allows the rest of the business to run better too. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kerry, and always a pleasure to have you. And down to Teresa.
Are you talking about me, Tristina? Sorry, I was looking for Teresa. That's okay, right?
Sorry.
No problem. I'm sorry. I looked off and I was looking for somebody else. But my name is Tristina Lockhart, and I am have been in the as Kerry said in the digital transformation space for a while in HR. On the implementation side, and recently pivoted to workforce development. And we work a lot with our partners to identify what types of technologies that they can use in nonprofit situations, especially ones that are hiring. And so a lot of what I'm doing is really focused on understanding how the digital space is working for HR, and then how do we actually help HR to quickly ramp up. And I think that one of the things that we need to do in order to create, or why I was interested in this, strategic and moving from strategic and combining strategic and tactical, is because if you're not able to actually get the work done, there is no strategy. And what happens a lot is we talk kind of in this peripheral theoretical space, and then people aren't actually able to implement it. And so how do we actually help them to quantify what actually works and what's right for the space?
Excellent. Thank you. And is it Vera?
Hi, thank you for having me. So one reason that really brought me into the digital space is I have been doing a lot of bigger projects in HR transformation, especially digital HR transformation. And I, as Lisa also said, find it fascinating how still there's so many HR departments, even in really big organizations, that just work in Excel templates or even paper-based partially, when there's so much technology already out there that we could use and that we can leverage. And for me, it's one of the things where I say HR's role also is to take that lead and to become that strategic function that we want to be, right, rather than an operational function. And to do that, we need to guide that digital transformation, and we need to make sure that this is not just happening in other organizational parts, may that be IT or whatever kind of company you work for in production, but really also with all the supporting functions, which is what we are as well. And this is where I have been coming in over the past years, and I've also helped very big organizations in consulting roles to do this kind of digital transformations, but now also internally for the company that I currently work for. And yeah, I find it fascinating. I think we can leverage a lot of technology, and it's our really our goal that we educate everyone around that, so more HR departments can do so.
Thank you. Excellent. And last but not least, Mindy.
Hey, hi. Pleasure to be here. And I've already loved what I'm hearing, because often we can think of digital transformation in different ways, because I think there are different layers of it. I think if we look at it from an organizational capability, a workplace ecosystem, often digital transformation, the HR person always isn't in that conversation. And so who is co-sharing, co-shaping, co-directing the digital strategy that ties back to the business strategy of the organization? Often this sits maybe with just the CIO, the COO, but often the HR person isn't a part of that. And to what everyone said, people and change is such a part of digital transformation. There's a digital touch point along every moment that matters in that employee journey. And that's where the heartbeat of HR is able to kind of come in and shape that. So how do we get to that greater co-shaping conversation with HR in place? And then we look back at HR as a team. Often we're the furthest behind in the organization when it comes to digital transformation. Our HR tech stack, our technology is on an island with HR that doesn't even connect with the rest of the organization's IT and their digital way of working. And so even in how we work, I've just helped recently an organization take their onboarding process from all paper to actually utilizing their systems. So we are still very much stuck in a very manual way of working within our own HR teams. And so then how are we also just thinking about our own digital transformation within how we work as HR to help support the rest of the organization? So I think it's this layered conversation. And how is HR involved in that? Or are we being told what to do and when we can do it, and how we utilize our budget within our HR teams to do that? And so I've been working within digital transformation probably my entire career of HR, over 20 years. I love technology. And so it's really about when we look at people, process, and systems, how are we doing that in harmony?
I'm just going to jump in, Mindy. I totally think your point on HR being present is so important. I've been in so many discussions with organizations over the years around transformation, and you're right. 95% of the time, HR isn't in the room, and it's absolutely affecting people. So the more, the better. Thanks for raising that.
Yeah, I totally agree as well. What I've seen too, Mindy, is that people don't have the budget. The HR team is always the last to be thought of when it comes to the digital space. And so the budgets are small and the expectations are high, and the staffing is limited. And so it's, how do we do these things quickly and effectively? And then who do we bring in as partners who may help to relieve some of the tension of the day-to-day activity that HR has going on while they're actually trying to implement technology?
Yes, it's so true. It's like, and with the digital strategy, often, HR has its own thing on the side, and we co-shape the whole. Like, how do we look at it from an ecosystem, and then also for the HR team itself, and the technology it's using, how is it a part of the overall like strategy? And then we should be thinking then about budget from a digital strategy, the entire ecosystem of it, and then the HR is a part of that. Anyways, I just love
Well,
this topic.
I can tell. It's going to be hard to get some questions in. No, it's been a really great start and great introductions, everybody. So thank you for that. And yeah, so maybe and I think you've sort of almost answered most of this question already, but I just so we frame it so we're all aligned, like what do we, do you want to unpack a little bit more, how do we define digital transformation within the HR function? So what's some examples to just make it a bit more practical so that everybody's aligned who's listening to us today with us?
I'll jump in, and then Mindy, maybe you go next. If you look at transformation, for anyone who's listening to this call and this isn't your world that you've lived in all the time, if you take any business and break it down to, as Mindy said, sort of people, process, technology. Technology is how you enable a process to happen for a company, and people are who do those processes or use that technology. And if you look at an organization, you break down core processes of a business into record to report, procure to pay, order to cash, like the major chunks of activity that happen in a business. The process that is most closely aligned to HR is hire to or recruit to retire, depending on how you define that path from end to end. And if you look at it, then digital transformation can really be specifically improving that process. There's lots of providers in the marketplace who have platforms uniquely supporting the HR space. Workday, SuccessFactors, others, ADP, there's lots in that space who do that. And then there's specialists in different pieces and parts of that around performance management or recruitment, et cetera. But to me, if I look at digital transformation, it's either uniquely for HR in that space, but also, as Lisa pointed out, in any space, people are affecting everything. So if it's a manufacturing digital transformation in your company, I worked for SAP, it didn't necessarily mean that the HR part was rolling out, but if you've got 50,000 people and their jobs are changing, it's an HR thing, whether or not the hire to retire process is being touched or not. If 50,000 people are changing their jobs, or 5,000 people, or 500 people, it's still an HR thing, because you've got to prepare the people and communicate and train and communicate and all of the pieces around that mean that the investment your company's making in digital transformation is going to happen.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and just add to that, because I think that we lose sight of the fact that digital transformation, to your point, Carrie, is about people and their ability to embrace that purpose, right? The common purpose, right? To collaborate, to advance it, to utilize the new tools, right? And to benefit from it for the organization. If you don't take into consideration how this affects people on multiple levels, right? It will fail. It'll be a complete disaster, because nobody will buy in, right? And you'll be ripping more stuff out over time than you actually are integrating.
Yeah, and so when you see that done really well, when a HR person is a part of that co-shaping strategy, and how are we then thinking about the human-centered design of that approach, where often those organizations are going to the people who are doing the actual work and asking them questions. How is it working today? What is the current state? What are the common pain points across? Who are the internal stakeholders here? Who's going to be impacted? And then there's almost like a voice, like they feel that they've been heard. And then as they start the discovery phase for what is that right solution, they feel like a part of that process. And they're being kept up to date. The communication plan that supports the transformation along the points of rolling that out, and then the iteration, hopefully, that happens as a part of the adoption and the utilization and the continuous improvement of those systems with the employees using it, and the training that supports all these things. And often these transformations can be a multi-year process, and if we know about it in advance, organizations that care are thinking about how then are we training those people up And if we're communicating that early on and having employees a part of the conversation, they may have the opportunity within that year span to then think about, actually, I don't want to do that work. I don't want to evolve to learn how to do that. What else maybe might I want to do? And now I have time to actually have a conversation about reskilling. And this is where the upskilling happens. And we just really think about skills. And I did this work a couple of years ago, and an individual that for 3 years, this project, and we were working with the employees, she wasn't taking the learning pathway. And when we got to the end of that 3 years, we unfortunately had to let go of several people because of the integration of this technology. And she came to me and she said, Mindy, 3 years ago, you told me this was happening. I didn't take advantage of the opportunities you gave to me, and this is on me. I worked myself out of a job.
So I'm not sure if Vera has a comment, but I wanted to chime in there because I heard Mindy and Carrie talk about long-term projects, and for smaller organizations, of course, at larger organizations, these implementations do take years often. But in smaller, more nimble organizations, the opposite is happening, right? They're trying to implement too quickly without the support structures that they need, without the understanding. And a lot of the most recent tools, I feel like technology tools for HR leave a lot to be desired where it comes to assisting the person who is the one-person HR team, or the small HR team that's still having to function all day. And those folks don't have the support system that they need, don't know who to reach out to externally to help them. And I feel like the technology creators should focus a lot more on the implementation piece of it, so that people have success running those programs after they have actually purchased them.
Yeah, I think I also want to quickly add to what you just said. For me, I've been on both ends. On the very small side of an HR organization, which is like 1 to 5 people, but then also ones where you have thousands of people within an organization, an HR organization. And obviously, the systems that are out there are designed more sophisticated. And what I've seen a lot within the digital transformation space is also this pitfall that people over-engineer, over-design a process, and then the people that actually have to work with it is just way too long, whether it's like routing forms back and forth, or just the amount of people that are involved in something that can be very simple. I think there is a tendency to do that a lot as an organization, because people say, okay, I take that budget and I implement a system, and the system is expensive, so let's leverage all the capabilities it has. But they don't necessarily think about, does that make sense? And I feel like this is also something where we, sitting in HR within digital transformation, also needs to put down our foot sometimes and say, hey, this is great, this is nice, but it does not make sense at this point in time. Also because maybe there's XYZ other transformations happening in parallel. So if that's just another one we're going to roll out, whether that's a new performance management system or a reward system, whatever it is, people will not necessarily use it. So I think this is something that's also often done incorrectly when we look at digital transformation, and we need to try to avoid that, or at least really flag all the risks that come with that, so it can be done in a more strategic manner.
Yeah, thanks. I think we've really got a good sense of what digital transformation is. Now, I'm just wondering, what role does HR play in the in your organizational digital transformation, and then what role really should HR play?
I'll jump in and give a start to it. At a minimum, if we're looking at something happening outside of HR should be there, because back to how are you going to embed this long term? Even if there's a team who is small or large, to your point, Trezina, whoever is responsible for the program, they might not be the day-to-day people, but the day-to-day people who help employees thrive on an ongoing basis are HR. So when we look at the need to have HR be a part of that in terms of upskilling, reskilling, communications, how does this become part of new hires? So if we're hiring new people, how do they hire into the right skills? All the things that are the fabric of what HR needs to do to make this actually have any longevity and repeatability, HR has to be a part. So sometimes there are things happening independent of HR, but HR has to be a role player there. The role that HR could and should play in addition to that, though, is they often typically are the ongoing keepers of culture and messaging and communication and expectation setting and performance management and all of the sort of well-being of the employee base. So HR should definitely be a part of strategically saying where and how do we do this, and then as that strategy set, figuring out what does HR have to do to be responsible or accountable for that, or where do they need to be a contributor, and there might be people on the project related to that who are dovetailing and connecting with HR on a regular basis. The other thing I'd say too, though, and it was interesting, Mindy, as you raised sort of the interview capability or need to talk to employees to get them everyone engaged. There's the mechanical side of transformation, which is on a Monday morning, we come off the elevator and we want everyone to turn right, not left, right? Like it's a very tangible, action-oriented movement to do something differently. But there's also, I go up the elevator. Do I know that I'm going up the elevator? Do I know I need to change where I'm going? Did anybody tell me? Did I go right and not left? How do I get support if I don't do it? All of that, which brings along, how do you build shared ownership for transformation, which has the engagement, and employee engagement is typically, again, owned by HR as the overall well-being. So part of that also resides here. And one of the spaces that I think often gets forgotten now, Trazina, to your point, is it's so much often about the technology, and people forget that it's about the people. And there is so much information now that can help those interviews or help that information by actually being really data driven and giving employees and managers and teams information on what are the change impacts, because we can now see how something's going to change. What are the training needs based on being able to see what's going to change? So aside from looking at that from a mechanical system perspective of what do we need to configure differently and what do we need to test and all that, techie stuff that isn't necessarily our responsibility at all the time, but how does that show us if we need to change these things in the system? What does that mean for users? And users are employees. So how do we help them be successful? So to me, HR certainly, really helps us get to that in terms of making HR at a very granular, performance-based, skills-based, change-based level be able to support the transformation. Mindy, over to you.
I feel like you just so well, kind of stated, kind of took the glue of what all the goodness everyone said to answer that question. I think that's, layered in there of why this isn't easy, right? This is difficult and it takes time to do these things. And I think Tristina is the one that was mentioning, especially in organizations where I even think in large organizations, sometimes we have the feeling of we got to get this done, we're behind, because we always feel like we're already behind because the rate of change is so quick. And so we need to get this done, and the sense of urgency or the scarcity mindset of leadership or the pressure from the board or from other stakeholders, investors, may often get us into a rushing capacity where sometimes maybe that voice in the room of HR is asking some of these questions can often feel like you're slowing it down, and people may not like that. And so how do we get to help as leaders come together and really question, what are we missing? Where are our blind spots? Let's take a moment to breathe, to inform this, because there is so much involved, and because humans aren't easy. We are complex, right? And the place of work is complex, and we need to think about all those things. And often then the transformation will have less road bumps and hurdles if we do take the time to plan in advance and ask these questions.
And I know, Roger, ready to probably move on to our next question, but I did want to say something really quickly on that front. I mean, Carrie and Mindy's statements were spot on. The thing that I think about all the time in why HR has to be in the room is what Mindy said earlier, upskilling and reskilling. And oftentimes that's forgotten in the transformation. We're so busy trying to implement that we forget there are people who have to use this technology now, and how are they going to maintain their jobs? And then also HR needs to be in the room because there very well may be layoffs that are associated once technology is put in place. And so we can help to look at how do we actually address that change that's coming? How do we help people feel comfortable, because they know it's coming? They feel it. They understand. It's the Walmart syndrome, right? You at one point there was never really cashiers everywhere, but there's cashiers at the front of the store, and now they're not. There's maybe one person roving back and forth, and they know that technology is coming. They understand it, and if HR is not in those conversations, then we don't soften the blow for the greater community of employees.
Any
I'm
more to this one?
going to jump in real quick and talk a little bit more about the communication part, because I think that we sit at the center of that. Change communication should focus on addressing, the issues of employees and providing that human touch. And who does that better than us?
No, so true. So building on that as well. So digital transformation in HR doesn't happen in isolation at all. Can you just talk about, in your experiences, how HR does collaborate with the rest of the business, IT, other departments that might be driving digital initiatives and transformation? And how do we really ensure we've tried to drive HR being really part of it, to get the buy-in across the organization?
I'll start just because I recently did this, and interestingly, I took the lead role, which is very, untypical. Usually that's an operations person or an operations executive. And I actually intentionally leaned in because nobody was taking responsibility for it. It was just this kind of rodeo going on, and people were, coming to the table. Well, I need this platform and I need that. And everyone was saying, oh, okay, great. Okay, great. And nobody asked the question of, how do all of these things integrate together? Right? You have a bunch of fragmented platforms and systems and processes that don't integrate at all. You have a fragmented team, right? Nobody's communicating in the same place. It's all over the place, and nobody was asking that question. And so I just took over and said, okay, well, we'll take everybody's suggestions, right, of what they need, right, and the why, and then I'm going to figure out whether or not, with those key, stakeholders, whether or not they are necessary, one, and two, how do they integrate into the organization? And is the organization ready for 25 new systems and platforms and, processes, right? Like, how many organizations are ready for that at all one time? Almost none, right? They just aren't. They don't have the maturity for it, right? So I think that's, the first part is collecting the data, the why, what is it going to do? Who's it going to impact? How's it going to make it better? How is it potentially going to make it worse? Right? Because there are some things that are going to make it more difficult for people. And you better get buy-in before you actually roll it out.
Yeah, I
Any
think
more?
Yeah, I was just going to add here. I think buy-in obviously is always very important. I completely stand with that also, Lisa, especially from upper management and the leaders, because if you do a transformation without buy-in, it's always going to be a very rocky road. For what parts do we collaborate with? I can only also now speak for what I've recently done. So I work for a production company in the aerospace sector, and one part, for example, where a big transformation has happened is throughout all our production systems, which are being unified. So that digital transformation is happening, not from HR perspective, but it's happening. Within production, however, you have a lot of data that will directly impact HR processes. So we have, whether that's timestamping, whether that's skills that you need for specific shifts. So then this collaboration comes into place where they have to have a conversation with us to say, okay, so we touch those systems now, and we are changing specific parts. How will that work in the future with payrolls? How will that work in the future with where do we store specific skill and competency data? Does it make sense to store it within the production, or do we take it back to a core HR system like SuccessFactors or SAP HCM? So I think these are conversations that are unfortunately always happening a little bit too late. So from my experience, they start those digital transformations in, for example, now production, and then at some point you realize, oh, we're touch basing on HR topics, and then we come into play. I think beyond that, obviously, the biggest part where collaboration has to happen is all the training and the communication materials. Communication materials, I mean, change communication, there's a long list of things that you should do and a very short list of things that organizations normally do. So I think this is something where many organizations can become better. It is often also the time factor that really limits that kind of communication. But with that communication also comes the training availability of people, and even creating those trainings upfront, having people that can train the employees on those new systems, and so on and so forth. And all of this is where HR and the business can collaborate in many different points, and we definitely should as well, because otherwise it's always a game of, I don't know, chase the chicken. So it's always the transformation already in place, and then they come back and they're like, oh yeah, we maybe should train the people. Kind of forgot about that. Who can create the training for us? And then, yeah, we know how that goes. It's just not ideal.
Yeah, Vera is right. There's often an afterthought from the people perspective, HR or otherwise, in terms of how to bring technology to life. What I would say too for HR, though, for everybody listening, we've got 400 or 500 people on the phone listening and share with your friends. Your company is making a significant investment when they are putting in digital transformation. They're spending a lot of money, and it is for sure one of the most strategic investments the organization is going to make whenever you're doing it, whether it's a multi-month, multi-year initiative. Don't wait around to be asked. So it's happening, like right now, as an example, in the SAP marketplace. So that's a significant part of the marketplace. SAP has told every company that they need to be on a new version of SAP by 2027. So if you have SAP at your company, there is a project being planned or already underway. And if you're not in it, it's happening. So go find who's doing it and knock on the door and say, hi, I'm here, I care. How can I be informed, aware, participate? Because ultimately, all the work streams, just like the rest of the project, so to get really tactical, Lisa lived through all this, but all the work streams of, who are my stakeholders? What are the jobs that are affected and the roles are affected? How do those roles need to touch with security? Because people need security profiles to do their jobs. What training do they need based on the new functionality that's coming with whatever system? How do we get that into performance management? How do we define those roles that become something you can measure against? When do we roll it out? What's the timeline for the program? Who's involved in that? What support do they have? All of those things are happening related to the project. Your company is likely also then investing in training software if you don't already have it, or they might be using one that you're not already familiar with, or there's a way to plug this into your performance management and your roles definition, and the skills identification of what's going to change from the process can become skills identification for what goes into your skills matrix for user competencies and so forth by role. So there's gifts in terms of information and technology and data in terms of how the organization runs that can make what you do in HR better, richer, and more connected to how you do run production, how you do run manufacturing, how you do run procurement. So right now, like every company in that space is doing it. Arguably, frankly, I'd say every company has always got some kind of technology activity underway. And having the folks who own the technology side know that you care versus thinking that you're going, please go away, don't make me deal with this thing, is an opportunity for you to stay connected as much or as little as makes sense along the way. So the opportunity to collaborate there, the need to collaborate high, and so look for it. If you're not already being asked, go play more, and then selfishly look at what can you get out of this. If there's going to be, if you're rolling out a program to a whole bunch of people and there's an investment being made, look for where that information can be pulled and used for you. Like Celonis, who I work for now, we talk about how you can use a data-driven approach to drive design. I've also brought to that, well, that data-driven approach gives you your training needs analysis and your change impacts. So the people who are in HR and change and training, who often are not getting involved over here, absolutely can and should use this, and it'll change the way they do their jobs. But the technology people don't think about the HR jobs and the people jobs. So looking at how to get yourself inserted is a gift for you that people might not know that you could be taking advantage of.
No, that's perfect, Carrie. And I was just thinking about how we need to frame ourselves as SMEs in this space when it comes to digital transformation. You need to be learning constantly, be the thought leader there, be the one that people can go to. In the last 2 years, I had worked on a merger and acquisition. And of course, HR was the last. Actually, it was talent acquisition that was the last that was thought of. HR was actually doing the transition, and then they forgot talent acquisition. It's like, that's your funnel. So people are coming into the organization. If you don't have talent acquisition included, you've got a huge gap there, right? And we were scrambling at the end of the project to try to figure out, well, how do we now implement HR effectively? I mean, talent acquisition effectively into this new HR platform. So it really is about being in the room, having the conversations. I think Vera said something earlier about chasing the chicken. You know, I feel like in HR, a lot of times we're chasing the chicken, right? Or which came first, the chicken or the egg? And we're the egg, and we don't know exactly where we stand. So it's definitely one of those things where we have to position ourselves as well-educated, knowledgeable, the go-to person. If you don't know, identify a person on your team who has that interest, if it's not your capacity, so that you can use them and leverage them to help the HR team to actually be seen by IT. Because a lot of IT folks, unfortunately, since I work in the technology space, period, they really don't think that HR people know anything about technology. So we have to help them to see that we do know and understand technology and that we're able to effectively implement it.
Just and then I think Kerry's had a good part of answering the question I'm going to ask next, but which is really with the HR digital transformation strategy, what would you see as really being the core elements? So if the people in the audience were going to be going and putting together such a strategy together, what would they really should considering including in that?
Lisa, I think you should go first since you just had to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to start with, establish a clear goal, right? Is why are you doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense right now? And then, obviously getting everyone on board on the leadership side, but I'll take that. I think that you need to get the next level invested, right? I mean, to your point, Christina, the understanding technology. I code. Do I code well? No. Am I going to be an engineer? Nope. However, I do make sure that I educate myself on the tech stack of the company that I'm working with or working in. And that means that when someone comes with the list of like, I need all of this, right? I actually understand what those systems do, right? And so if I have a question or I realize, oh, this is going to require us to go back and do some workforce planning, right? To the point that Mandy made earlier, that I'm able to go to them and speak as educated as I possibly can, given my limited knowledge. But I can go to them and say, okay, I understand that this does this, but I don't think that it is totally necessary because we have this system, and tell me if this system is not adequate, why, right? And if it's going to replace it, okay, explain to me why. But I can also challenge them. Right. And engineers don't love it when I challenge them, but I do because I have to. Right. I'm not just going to say, OK, yeah, sure. Let's do that. So I spend a lot of time educating myself on not only the tech stack in place, but what's being proposed in organizational, in any type of transformation. And I'd say keep it simple. Don't complicate it. Like so often we complicate it, and don't do that because that just creates more chaos. It's already so much going on when you change it, right? There's just a lot of movement going on, right? And that freaks people out, right? It just does. It's change is hard. So keep it simple. Don't overthink it. Don't overcomplicate it. I always say keep it simple, stupid.
And Lisa rightly is like you're outlining how you're the business partner in this scenario with IT. So you would be the same person if you were the manufacturing person or the procurement, like you are representing the discipline you're in. And in the same way, IT is trying to keep it simple because they want as few systems to maintain to be as simple as possible so that, like the analogy I often used is like thinking about how to do an ERP rollout is imagine if all of us on this phone call had to have the same apps on our phone. Imagine if everybody listening on this phone call had to have the same apps on their phone, everybody in your neighborhood, everybody in your city. Like for organizations, you're trying to get to where there's some commonality of how work happens. So the keep it simple for sure. In terms of an overall digital strategy, that's typically what most organizations want to do is to retire old systems, harmonize systems, and get to where things that talk to each other more easily are more current or more easily maintained. All of those things are typically the drivers behind that. And then exactly as Lisa pointed out, what do I need as the business owner? Will this meet my needs? To Trazina's point, do I have recruitment in there and talent acquisition? Does the scope of this program actually meet my business requirements? So if you look at a program, you need to be on scope, on time, on budget, on value. Did we do the right stuff? Based on doing the right stuff, did we stay on time? Did we stay on budget? And did we get the outcomes we were aiming for? To Lisa's point earlier of what's my goal? So the digital strategy is typically going to look at how does it integrate with the rest of the organization? And depending on your level of decision making, do you want a system that integrates with the other systems you have at your organization? Is it a subset of that? Do you want something independent? What does that mean for you in terms of data management and data cleansing? So all of those things you do have to get as smart as Lisa's saying around what's the information that's going to go in? What am I going to get out? How easy it is for me to maintain it? Who in my IT organization knows how to use the system that we've got or the new system we're going to so that I've got support partners to help me keep this current and fresh and do all of what I need to do as my business of HR continues to evolve. So all of those become parts of what the right strategy is. But again, get in the room.
And I love that. Yes, exactly, Carrie. And Lisa, I love the KISS that, keep it simple. I mean, it doesn't have to be real complicated. But the one thing that I think that we should also always be thinking about is the shelf life of the technology that we select. Because often we pick something that in a few years, it's like, okay, let's do this all over again. And sometimes, it makes me wonder, are we doing that so that we can keep ourselves busy? Or are we actually thinking about the implications to the organization when we do technology that does not have an enduring shelf life? So that was the one thing I think a strategy always has to have.
I love that, Trazina, because often they're thinking about the technology for today. And where that part of that beginning stage that Lisa and Carrie and everyone has talked so much about is about imagining the future. And then how does that tie back to that business strategy? So that technology knowledge that Lisa was so well articulated, it's also going back to, do you understand the business acumen? Is there a clear that why and that value, and how is it validating? And how does that even impacting our consumer and our customer, not only for today, but also for the future? And so it's kind of tying all those things together.
So how many of us, and audience as well, thought that Slack was the best communication tool in the world when it came out? Like, this is amazing. Like, everything can happen in there. And when did that break? I bet you all of us can pinpoint when that broke. And for me, it was when I was having one-on-ones with people and they're like, well, I spend the first hour and a half of my day going through Slack. Like, I'm sorry, what? You do what?
Yeah.
Right? Because, well, I've been offline because I'm over in Asia Pac and, 8 hours of stuff has happened. So it takes me at least an hour and a half to get, caught up. I'm like, okay, well, that's broken now. So we're going to stop that. How many of us have had that? It's, to your point, we have to think about the shelf life, right? How long will this work and where does it break?
Now I'm going to jump in. So this is an amazing conversation. We've spoken so much about strategy. I just wanted to, the title included tactical as well. So let's just imagine now that we've got a strategy in place and we're implementing it. So we've got a tactical. So when we're doing that, I'm just wondering, what are some of the biggest challenges in implementing the strategy in HR, and what are some of the ways that you've addressed that in your experience? If we can talk about that.
I feel like one of the biggest challenges that I've seen is that as we go through that digital transformation, obviously we have the strategic part where we say, okay, this is what we'd like to do. And then when we go into the tactical, a lot of the times what I've seen is that HR and whatever it is, the technical side of it, whether that's an SAP or Workforce or any other IT system that you implement, there's not necessarily always that conversation happening hand in hand. So there's sometimes HR coming out with, or some stakeholders within HR coming out with, this is a business process that I would like to have. And that business process looks great on paper, but might not fit with the tool that you're trying to implement. So that tool might not have those capabilities, or just you would have to find a lot of workarounds. And what I've seen a lot happening is that going into the implementation, they don't speak to each other early on. So you're trying to design something onto a system that is not designed for that kind of process, or even vice versa. So you have a process already that's kind of like a best practice that's coming from a provider as SAP, for example, and you're trying to implement it into your business, but you haven't really thought about how many things will that affect. So I feel like this is happening a lot, and this is something that we have to be really careful of, so that the technical side and the HR side speak to each other really early on in the process to see what is the wish and what is the actual capability, and how can you bring those two together.
Vera, you're 100% right. And that's actually exactly right now what I was talking about. So companies who've been looking at what are the system impacts, but then taking that same information to be able to say, how does that allow people to do their jobs? What are the change impacts? How does a job change? If we follow this process now, we're going to follow this new process later. And how does that compare? What's the best practice coming out of the new system? Because frankly, that's really where you want to start, because they've been listening to all their customers to build out what they need. What's the best practice? What's the way we're going to modify that to meet our business needs? So we have a global template that's integrated with all the different parts of your business. And then how does that compare to what we do now? And what's that change going to look like? So how do we prepare people? So very tactically, to me, that gets into the work streams of the program. If I'm the HR owner, if I'm where Lisa was, where I own the HR program, then I need to have, what is the timeline of the project? What's the testing of the project? What's the scope of the project? That's program management, and the program topic scope happens to be HR. If I'm looking at it where the program has more than just HR scope, I also need to own and be aware of the people side of that, depending on my responsibility. And even if I don't own change and training, as HR, I should be connected to that, because I'm going to be the recipient of all the outputs of that group. So if there's new training being built, or new communications being sent, or all the activities that are happening related to that, at the end of the day, when that project team goes away, I still own all the people stuff. So it's mine to carry forward. So very tactically, I should be at least at a quarterly or monthly basis connected into that project, knowing what the strategy is, knowing what the tactics are, knowing if we have 500 or 5,000 employees who are impacted, what roles are impacted, in what way are they impacted, how are we going to train them, do we need to recruit differently, are we automating anything that's going to change jobs, will that change? To all the discussion we've had, we hit it in a few places. Did jobs get impacted? Are jobs going to shrink, grow, go away? Are there new jobs? How do we recruit, reskill, retrain around that? And what are all of the HR activities if we do need to do a layoff, if we do need to do upskilling? If we're European, what do we need to do with European Works Councils or individual country works councils? All of the actual HR mechanics of managing employees through transition. This is a big transition. So HR needs to be minimally part of the strategy and quarterly or monthly part of the tactics. And then depending on how much actual authority or responsibility, then you're looking at the work streams of what's the communications work stream, what's the stakeholder work stream, what's the training work stream. All of that becomes, again, the piece of the project that you might own. So it is just as programmatic as the technical side, but it's how does it all come to life through people? And I'm going to stop talking because I could talk about this for 3 more hours. So Rob, or over to Trezina or Mindy, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, Yeah, but it's wonderful to listen to you, Kerry. You're very insightful on this. Yeah, if we just continue on that, though, I think that what you're talking about is about implementing tactically anything is about change, isn't it? And so it's really important that that we really are part of planning and implementing that. I'm just wondering, and often this is an area where the benefits of the investment, goes skew if. So what are some of the ways, maybe, so Kerry's introduced into the topic, what are some of the ways of getting feedback to just engage how well the implementation of the change is actually going? So what are some thoughts about how you do that? Let's give that one a go. Someone else. Mindy, I'll pick you.
I just want to make sure Tristina looked like she unmuted. So I just want to make sure,
did you?
Tristina, were you wanting to?
I did, but my comment was actually, and I'll say it really quickly, was more about the challenges that we faced. And a lot of times it's funding. And so that was the piece that I wanted to say, that sometimes we just don't have the money, and realistically, that's the issue. So Mindy, I will defer to you on how we give feedback outside of, the normal processes, but go ahead, Mindy.
Awesome.
But yeah, I think what you're saying there is actually really right too, is that often the actual implementation of the actual change and the people change actually doesn't get given funding. We just do all the technical things and we just leave it there. So
and then we're meant to do the best that you can.
Yeah. Make it up.
You make that all work, people team.
And do it quickly.
Right. And I think that's Kerry, Tristina, this is all about making sure that you, in your planning early on, what is it going to take to maintain this? And then kind of this goes into the feedback mechanism, what are those data points that you're using to monitor now that you have this program to, is it still delivering the change that we anticipate? Because as a business continues to evolve, how are we then evolving the technology that we've put in place? And so how are we then collecting the right data points? And are those the right data points to collect? And how are we also getting the voice of the employee within that to be able to provide context to what is that data that it's saying? Do we have the opportunity? Is there a way within these tools for employees to give feedback? Often now employees are able to give feedback right within the systems, and who's looking at that? And how, and that's the part where with HR, if it is a tool, how are we making sure that people are actually leveraging the capabilities within the system to be able to get that feedback? And if that isn't there, how do we make sure that we're putting that in there? And how are we collecting it in a way that is easy? Otherwise, employees aren't going to use it. I think that's another thing. We're asking employees to do yet another thing different. And I think Lisa very early on said, when is this change happening? What is the timing of this change? What other change is happening in the organization that we're already asking employees to, because our employees are already overburdened, disconnected, disengaged. And if we drop more change on top of that, we have to be really mindful of how we're asking people to change, when they're asking them to change, and how much at one time, and being very thoughtful in this. And I think engagement surveys only get to so much. So if engagement survey is your measurement, how do we really rethink that? And how do we really get to the point of how are we actually collecting the right information of how the employee feels, and how is it going to use the specific tools in their day-to-day to do their job versus just a sentiment survey?
I totally agree with that, Mindy. And the key piece for me, the takeaway out of what you just said, which was spot on again, was just the cadence, right? If we're going to send out surveys, I remember working somewhere where I was like, seriously, guys, we cannot send people a survey every week and ask them the same question, because after a while, they are numb to it, one, or they're starting to answer in a different way because they're like, you're not getting my message, right? So how we do it, what's done with the information, how we acknowledge it once we receive it, are really the questions more than, to me, that are important. How do we actually acknowledge the feedback that we're given? Once we had done a digital transformation and compensation, we spent all this money on the technology, but people felt like their compensation was not fair. And we kept asking them in surveys how they felt about the technology. And I started to see a trend of people saying, maybe if we didn't have new technology, you could pay me more. Well, that's a real issue for people. So we should have been addressing why we're doing this with the technology. And it looks like we're putting money somewhere that you feel like is not valued. But what Carrie said earlier, we're putting that money there to actually help you as an as a part of the organization. And how do we make sure that we're answering those questions?
Yeah, a few things I want to add on this. If I boil change management down into one sentence, I say it's about expectations and accountabilities. So what are we expecting is going to happen, and where am I accountable to plug in? And from a employee experience standpoint in digital transformation, there is the how do I feel about it, which is the art of change management. And then there's the can I do something differently, which is the science, like am I turning left or right? To your comment, Mindy, on data, I think the other thing and this leads to your last question, Rod, I know you want to say what's our one piece of advice? There is so much data available that this population can use more than just the tech people. So the process mining, the ability now in transformation at go live of a new system to be able to see how a user is actually doing their work. Users don't always tell you what they do or don't like. I believe people come to work every day trying to do a good job. I don't think anyone comes in saying, I think I'll be a crappy employee today. And when they make a mistake, they're not trying to make a mistake. And we don't necessarily know they made it. They might not know they made it. So there's capability now and data on what level of process alignment or adherence does a user have. So at Go Live, we can support them and say, hey, we see this as a challenge. We can do a lunch and learn. We can do support. We can bring support people to you. So as HR, my piece of advice would be learn and find all the things that you can take advantage of that help people, which didn't exist 5-10 years ago, didn't exist 2-3 years ago, that really can make the people experience and the whole HR space that much more data-driven and keep in line and as important as or more important than so many of the other processes in terms of helping your business run. Lisa, over to you for your words of wisdom.
Yeah, I think that you took the words right out of my mouth. I would say that the next, one of the things that I think is super important is, and I'm going to talk about just HR systems. I'm going to go beyond just the organization, but I typically, when I'm looking at rolling out something, I take a set. First of all, I create personas, right, within the organization, right? And then I pick people from those personas and I bring them in and I do a beta of the actual system. I give them permission. I say, here you go. This is what I think it can do. You try it. And in a week, we're going to talk again and you're going to tell me if it's crap or if you love it or whatever, right? But if I do that, I find that I get buy-in if someone loves it. And if they don't, we can talk about that. And they are doing that encourages them to motivate potentially reluctant peers within the organization that are like, oh my God, but I beta, I would say that's a really good way to start. Don't roll something out until you get a subset of people and say, try it. Tell me if it works.
User acceptance testing. Absolutely.
Exactly. Does it help?
Thanks, Lisa. Who next? To share one more bit of advice. We've got like 2 minutes left.
I will. Oh, sorry, Tristan.
No, go ahead, Vera, please.
Okay. No, I think I just want to add to what Lisa said and even go a step before that, because user acceptance test is nice once you have a system that can run. But for me, it's really first go to the user and have a conversation on what is their expectation that they will get from the new system? What is it that they actually need from the new system? And why do they need it? Because so many times you have a conversation, then they realize that maybe the system is not actually the fix, right? So this is a conversation I have a lot also with managers when they say, hey, if this system is in place, everything is going to be better. Maybe it's not going to be better, because what you need to do is have a conversation with your employees. What you need to do is have your employees enabled on something, a process, a system, whatever it is. So for me, it really starts there. And this is also what I highly recommend with any implementation or transformation.
And I'll just chime in, just set realistic expectations with your strategy. And then the tactical roadmap should actually enforce the strategy. And I feel like sometimes it doesn't. There's a real disconnect in how we actually tactically do something and get to the strategy. So that's my advice.
Thanks.
And if you're like hearing this in our audience and you don't even know, you're like, I'm not a part of these conversations. I think the first step is to go find out who's having these conversations and go like invite yourself to these meetings, find out when they're happening and sit in these meetings and start to listening and absorb and start learning.
That was my point. Go become friends with IT. They're doing this, and digital transformation doesn't happen without IT, and you don't want to do it independently without them. Go find IT and become their friend.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks all the panelists. It's been a great conversation. I'm sure we could go for another hour, if not longer than that. I guess what has been really clear is that the journey of digital transformation is really just multifaceted. It's ongoing. It's always changing. So it's always demanding continuous learning, adaptation, and collaboration. As Carrie just said about, get to know IT. So thanks, everyone. It's been a great conversation, and I look forward to seeing you all in future panels. So thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.